Welcome to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan, here with our Those We Have Lost project manager, Amy Spiro. Amy, thank you so much for joining me today as we mark 2 years to the October 7th, 2023 Hamas incursion into southern Israel, which saw the murder of 1,200 and 250 taken hostage into Gaza. Thank you for joining me in our Jerusalem office.
Thank you for having me.
This episode, we're going to focus on 8 immigrants to Israel who lost their lives at the very beginning of the war. We are also going to discuss the stats of the project, this ongoing project that Amy has spearheaded. And we're going to talk about these 8 immigrants to Israel. So Amy, start out by telling us, who are these immigrants and why did you choose them?
Yeah, so as I said, I chose 8 people and I chose them from 8 different countries. So we're going to talk today about people who immigrated to Israel from Ethiopia, Russia, Argentina, France, the US, the UK, Ukraine, and Iran. And I, wanted to have that wide spectrum of people because obviously, Israel is made up of immigrants from all over, those who came 70 years ago and those who came one of the people I'm going to speak about came 2 years before he was killed. And so that, our listeners and our readers, obviously a lot of them are immigrants and many of them know people who immigrated to Israel. And I thought that this would be a unique way to look at the project in a more narrow focus.
Okay, so looking more broadly at the project, how many people have we covered so far?
So we're recording this a little bit in advance. By the time it does go out, we should have around 1,150 posts. But some of them you will see are, couples or siblings or
Entire families.
Exactly, entire families. So we're at this point, we're right around 1,250 people who we've written about. The vast majority of them killed on October 7th. A small number of those are people who've been killed later.
So right now, at this point, how are you deciding who you're covering?
So at this point, I would say it's fair to say that we're winding down the active part of the project. Obviously, with 1,250, we have written about the vast majority of people who were killed on October 7th. There are some names that we just basically had to decide there was not enough information about there to write about. There were 6 Chinese citizens, for instance, who were killed on October 7th, who were workers, foreign workers living in Israel. The Chinese government has largely covered that up. There's really no information out there. So we have put their photos and their names up on the site if you do access it. But in terms of an actual post, so the ones we're doing now, we're still working at this point mostly on hostages who were either killed in captivity or their death was only declared much later. So the timeline-wise, those have been done later. And at this point, we're mostly writing about ones whose bodies are still in captivity. We have written a small number. We've written around 50, I would say, soldiers who were killed in the Gaza ground invasion. So, we do also take, requests. So people who write in, you can write into OBITS, OBITS at Times of Israel, or on the page itself, there's a Contact Us link. And if you want your loved one to appear and they have not yet, we're happy to hear from you.
Okay, so let's dive in. Amy, you provided me with 4 names, and the first is Carol Siman Tov, who was 70 when she was murdered by Hamas terrorists in her home in Kibbutz Nir Oz on October 7th. And Amy, I mentioned to you, she just looks like somebody I would have known. She was killed on the same day that her son, Johnny Siman Tov, as well as her daughter-in-law, Tamar, and grandchildren, Shachar, Arbel, and Omer, were all murdered in their own home in the kibbutz. There was a joint funeral held for all 6 members of the family at Kibbutz Lahav on October 19th. So Carol was a retired nurse who was raised in Leviton, Pennsylvania, and she made Aliyah to Israel when she was a 21-year-old newlywed and young mother. Her first marriage ended in divorce, and then she remarried to Freddie Siman Tov, with whom she had 3 more children. The health ministry eulogized Carol as a symbol of resilience and unconditional love, which illuminated generations of children and grandchildren. She didn't keep the good for herself. herself. She was always sharing everything generously. Amy, who is your first?
Yeah, I want to talk about someone also in their 70s, Haim Zohar, who was 73 when he was killed. He was a native of Tehran in Iran, and he was born in 1950. And he came when he was 7 years old with his family to Israel. They settled in Kfar Saba. When he was 15, he decided he wanted to move, and he moved to Kibbutz Be'eri on the Gaza border, where he lived for the next almost 60 years. He worked as a delivery driver for the printing house, the famous Bailey Print House, which we've heard so much about the past couple of years. And, Kibbutz Be'eri had this, throwback moment in their obituary when they talked about when Israel transitioned from the lira to the shekel, and Kibbutz Be'eri was part of that printing process. And they said the printing presses were running 24 hours a day, and Chaim worked around the clock with them. They said he loved cooking traditional Persian food from his native land, like rice and salad, and he loved to cook for his family. In his later years, he was suffering from dementia, and he had a devoted Sri Lankan caregiver, Sujit, and both Sujit and Chaim were murdered in Kibbutz Be'eri on October 7th.
So the next person we're discussing is Staff Sergeant Binyamin Loeb, who was a 23-year-old French-Israeli lone soldier who was killed on October 8th in Kibbutz Kfar Aza on the second day of Hamas's attack against Israel. He was a combat fighter in the Orthodox Division of the Paratroopers 202 Brigade. He was buried on October 10th in Jerusalem, and 2,000 people from all sectors of Israeli society attended his funeral. Again, he was a lone soldier. He came from a family affiliated with the Chabad community in France, and he was the son of a town's Rabbi Netanel Loeb. He made Aliyah to enlist in the army, which is remarkable, of course, in the light of the ongoing struggle with the Haredi community here in Israel. His mother said he was sent to the front. Sadly, he was hit by several bullets, and despite the care provided by his comrades, he did not survive. The young man was supposed to come back to France a few months after his unfortunate death, and at his funeral, his father said, "I had a dream for Binyamin. I wanted that after the army, he would immediately marry."
I also want to talk about someone who was killed on the front lines, and that's Sergeant First Class Mulugeta Gadif, who was 29. He was a police officer. He lived in Kiryat Gat. He was born in Gondar, Ethiopia. Gondar, which I've actually visited, is the main Jewish community currently in Ethiopia today. In 2007, when he was 12 years old, his family moved to Israel. And they lived in a absorption center, Merkaz Klita in Beersheba, and he attended a dorm school in Yerushalayim in Jerusalem. After he was in the army, he worked as a security guard, and he established a local soccer team for youth in Kiryat Gat. He loved soccer. He played as a kid. He played as an adult. And then he joined the police in March 2023, just 6 months before he was killed. And 5 months before he was killed, he had his firstborn daughter, Eliah. On October 7th, Mulu, as he was known, he entered Kibbutz Be'eri with a group of 8 other police officers and a civilian in 2 jeeps. And immediately as those jeeps entered, they were ambushed by Hamas with RPGs and with gunfire. Only 1 person survived out of those 10 people. And because the battle was so severe and the damage was so intense, it took more than a week for most of those bodies to be identified, and his family did not know what had happened for all that time.
Let's talk about Silvia Mirensky, who was 80 when she was murdered by Hamas terrorists in her home in Kibbutz Ein HaShlosha on October 7th. She was a widow and she lived alone, so she ran to the safe room in her home until she hoped things would quiet down. But after a few hours, when it seemed safe, she came out of the room to get something to eat. Just at that moment, terrorists threw an explosive into her safe room, setting the house on fire. She was trapped in the burning house, and her last words spoken over the phone to her son were, "I'm burning, I am choking." She was found dead the next day. She had moved to Israel with her husband Shaul and her sons Ariel and Chaim just before the Yom Kippur War broke out in 1973, 50 years prior. And when the war broke out, the family was debating, should we go back to Argentina or stay? They decided to stay, obviously, and Mirensky was an excellent cook, making all of her family and especially her grandchildren's favorite food whenever they came to visit. That just struck me because, of course, I can never remember what my children's favorite foods are. They have made lists for me. And in general, she took full advantage of her golden years. She tore through books, listened to her favorite music on the radio, played sports at the Kibbutz Senior Center, and made original works of art, all while spending time with friends.
I want to talk about a couple, Dr. Victoria and Professor Sergey Gredeskul. They were both 81 when they were killed. They were natives of Ukraine, and they moved to Israel in 1991 when they were around 50. So, a significant age to start over in a new country where you don't know the language. But they both continued. They already had distinguished careers, and they continued in that. They settled, Fakim, and they both started working at Ben Gurion University in Be'er Sheva. Victoria was a math lecturer, and Sergey was a physics lecturer. They both retired from the university in 2012, and they were murdered in their home in Ofakim on October 7th. The chair of the Ben Gurion University Physics Department, Oleg Krishevsky, said that Sergey was also a musician, a storyteller, and historian of the famed Kharkiv School of Physics. Oleg said that Sergey and Victoria have been among the nicest, gentlest, most intelligent people I have ever met.
My final post is on Sergeant Emil Eliav Samoylov, who was 22 and a guard with Kogat. He came from Haifa, but originally he came from Russia. He moved to Israel only in 2021. He was a security guard in the Kogat unit and stationed at the Erez outpost right next to the crossing from Gaza, which was among the first places attacked and just overrun when Hamas stormed across the border. He was buried in Tel Aviv on October 11th and is survived by his parents, Rita and Pinchas, and his siblings, Leonard, Vladislav, and Maria. He, as I said, was raised in Russia, raised in Moscow, and he attended a Chabad school starting in third grade. That made him become religiously observant, and now his mother is as well. So after he moved to Israel in 2021, he already had a lot of family here. It was his lifelong dream to serve in the IDF, and only in 2022 he enlisted in the army, serving in Kogat, which is the coordinator of government activities in the territories, as a security guard. He was apparently very into physical fitness and continued to keep up a workout regimen on base, which is really difficult. Believe me, I know from my own personal children who are soldiers. His commander, Elchanan Chazan, told Channel 12 News that Emil was like his little brother, both because of his unique personality and also because he was a lone soldier. Emil was a friend, a true partner, and one of those people who, as soon as you say their name, anyone who hears it smiles.
The last person I want to speak to also moved to Israel in 2021, Jake Marlowe, who grew up in London. He was killed on October 7th at the Nova Festival. He was working as a security guard there. The last thing that anyone heard from him was, he sent his friend a WhatsApp voice note saying, "There's chaos here. We're trying to evacuate people. We're trying to get people out." And nobody heard from him since then. He grew up, as I said, in London. He told his family that he didn't see a future for himself in the UK, that he didn't feel that it was a safe place for Jews to live. He'd always felt most at home in Israel, and that was where he wanted to build his life. And so he'd arrived just 2 years before. Before he moved to Israel, he was a bass player with a metal band, Desolated, and they'd released a number of albums. And, in his time in Israel, he was finding his way, pursuing if he could have a musical career. And as I said, working security at the festival, which is the last festival he attended.
Amy, thank you so much for joining me in the Jerusalem office to discuss this project. It is so important. And I just want to reiterate something that Amy said at the beginning of the program, that it is an ongoing project. At this point, we are mostly covering people who are requested, meaning families, friends who would like their loved one covered. Please do write us to obits@timesofisrael.com. Amy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.